Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to show you how I painted up my Plagueburst Crawler using contrast paints, weathering powders, a few technical paints, some basic techniques, dry brushing, washing, base coating. Nice and simple. Let's get into it. So I've developed this technique so that the first part of it is really quick and simple. First of all, you need to cover your whole model in something like Wraithbone spray or Gracia, depending on how dark you want your contrast paints to be. So once the model is based and sprayed, I'm going to take my big old small Citadel dry brush and I'm going to work from the inside areas out, so all of the tracks and the inner working parts, with Iron Breaker. I want a good coverage of this all over the model, all over the inside working parts. Like I said, it's not going to be doing any of the armor plating yet, and the reason why I'm working from the inside out is it allows me to be quite messy. I don't have to worry about being neat, I don't have to worry about watching where the paint's going. I can just throw the paint on all over the tracks, and if it gets in any other part of the model, it's no big problem because we can tidy it up later. Next I'm going to take Basilicanum Grey and a decent size brush, and I'm going to cover all of the silver to dull it down. You don't want this bright, nice, shiny looking silver. We're going to start to work in the shades and start to put in the shadows and make it look dirty and grimy. This is the first stage of making it look dirty. Any Nurgle vehicle is going to be dirty. In fact, I would never paint a model without putting a shade on it. I used to use Agrax Earthshade and Null Oil, but I since changed to using Basilicanum Grey because this seems to work much better for shade and metal. It's becoming my new favourite. Now, having said that, the next stage is to cover the metal in Agrax Earthshade, because you don't just want a simple black, you want some interesting colours on there and some transitions. You want brown into black. Later on I'm going to be throwing some rust on it as well. But next stage is cover all the metal parts that you've already covered in Basilicanum Grey with Agrax Earthshade. Don't forget these little exhaust ports at the back. I don't know what they are. Who knows? So just go around all the areas on the model with the silver, including the weapon housings, the bits on the mortar that allow it to go up and down. And once you've got that complete, the next stage is to move on to some Necron compound. So we're going to brighten up this metal now that we've dulled down with our shade, and I'm going to be using this small Artis-Opus dry brush. I picked up these a couple of weeks ago. I've been using them recently and they're really good. So dry brushing, for anybody who doesn't already know, is a technique where you basically get the brush dry. You use Citadel dry paints, which are really good for it, and then you wipe off most of the paint. So you use a bit of tissue and you work it in, work the paint into the bristles, and then you quickly flick it over, going against the detail. So if there's a line, you go horizontal across that line. The idea is the paint that is on the brush gets picked up by the raised edges of the model, and it doesn't get left in the recesses, leaving your shade in the recess. So once all the metallic areas have been complete and they've been shaded and they've been dry brushed, it's time to move on to all of these ridges, these chains and the edges and the spikes that Chaos models tend to have. And these are going to be brass. I'm going to start off with Gryph-hound Orange. This is going to be the base. I'm going to go around them all nice and carefully. And eventually this is going to end up having a brass highlight, and then it'll be shaded with a few ink washes. But I like the Gryph-hound Orange, especially for Nurgle, because it looks like a really dark, rusty kind of metal. It's a good base for a rusty metal. The next stage is back to the dry brushing, and this is a brass colour, which is actually a gold. It's called Balthazar Gold. So the idea is we're going to cover all of these areas, all of the raised areas, with the gold to give it a shine. Next, I'm going to cover all of the mistakes that I've made with Wraithbone out of the pot. So by this stage you're bound to have made some mess, but we're going to tidy it all up with the Wraithbone, getting ready for the next stage, which is going to be the contrast paints onto the armour. I'm going to darken down the gold with a bit of Agrax Earthshade. So again, this is the starting of the weathering techniques of the shading. Next we move on to Basilicanum Grey, and after I've given it one coat of Agrax Earthshade, I'm going to start to pick out certain areas of the brass that I want to be Basilicanum Grey. So this is going to be around the rivets, it's going to be certain areas on the spikes, at the base of the spikes, and anywhere where I think is going to be, it should be darker than usual. Next we get Contrast Plaguebearer Flesh. So this is the start of the armour plate. All the green areas, we're going to give it 2 coats of this, because this Plaguebearer Flesh is quite thin to start with and it's a bit yellowy, so it needs a good few layers. And all you got to do is go around basically tracing all of the areas, the barrels of the, not the barrels, the armour of the guns, and also a few of the armour plates on the side of the tank itself. I didn't want it to all be Skeleton Horde, which is the next colour I'm going to use for the main armour. So I'm going to start with the Plague-based mortar itself, and with this one I'm using quite a flat brush, and I'm doing it in quite even strips. I don't want to be sloshing it on everywhere. I want to get a nice even coat. Try and avoid any pooling if I can. If I can do it in one long coat, then that's better. You see where I stopped there, you start to get little tide marks, and it looks a little bit uneven. So the idea with this is you spread the paint along the flat surface and try not to let it pool in areas as best you can. It's difficult in a big model AS. It's much easier on the smaller sort of marine sized models, because you can get away with it more. Large flat areas with tanks, these contrast paints, they're a little bit more difficult to use, but they still get good results if you use them alright. After covering the armour plate, I give the barrels of all of the guns a nice thick coat of Tevis Corrosion. Unfortunately, technical issues, the camera that I was using didn't record it, so I can't show you that part. But after that, I give it a nice good dry brush with Riser Rust. So now all the base coats are complete. We're going to use Vallejo Engine Fuel Stains, Agrax Earthshade, and Weathering Powders, Forge World Fresh Mud. On the palette, I've got it mixed up. Over here I've got the fuel stain, the middle is the mud, and the one on the end there is the Agrax Earthshade. And I just use a nice thin brush, this is a 0, and I mix between the three, depending on how dark I want it to be. And I'm just starting to paint in the downward streaks from the oil stains and the weather stains. And you mix between the 3 different versions you've got, one light, one medium, one really dark. Adding in the powders if I want it to be dark, watering it down with a bit of the fuel stains if I want it to be lighter, and you just play around with it. You just go over all areas, all of the pox marks, and you have all the weathering streaks. And you've got to take your time with this bit, build it up nice and slowly, adding layer upon layer, making it darker in places, lighter in others. There's no hard and fast rules with this. You kind of just go with it until you're happy. Moving on to the next area, back to the previous area. You can do it as much as you want. There is no right or wrong. Picking out all these areas on the end, all of the scuff marks, all of the pox marks, all of the rivets. Chaos models really suit this sort of thing. You can do it with Marines, but Marines tend to have cleaner armour, so there's less areas to do it on. Chaos, they have a lot more pox marks, especially Nurgle. Same with the Dozer Blade. Going to be doing exactly the same technique, just slowly building up all of these layers of dark streaks. Once you're happy with all the weathering you've done, it's time to dirty up those tracks again. So orange rust and some fixing powders. Mixed on a palette again. I've got a watered down version here, and I've got a drier version in the next little section. And I'm going to go between the two, and I'm going to paint this all into the tracks, all over the place. Now with this being methylated spirits, or some sort of alcohol based thinner, when it evaporates it leaves a dry powder. It looks really good. And finally, we're going to use Nylock Oxide. So this is going to be used with a really fine brush. This is a size 03. And we're going to be picking out little tiny details on the brass. So in the eyes of the skulls, in any sort of deep recesses you can find, around the edges of rivets, in any of the nicks and cuts that you find all over on these Nurgle models. And this is the kind of paint where less is more. You don't want to be covering the whole area in this paint. It's very much used for tiny little details and just as an accent highlight. So only the bases. I'm not going to cover the whole thing. Like I've said, less of this paint looks really good. So there you have it, one complete Plagueburst Crawler, which took one afternoon to complete. I hope you like what you've seen on the video. If you do like it, please give it a thumbs up, please leave a comment, I'd love to get your feedback, and please subscribe to the channel. See you guys later, goodbye.